Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online program titled Al Martinez in the Korean War, a future columnist hones his craft. Thank you for joining us for this Book Club of California presentation. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar. For those of you that are new to the Book Club of California, the book club is a nonprofit member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the literature and the history of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one we're doing this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Membership dues are modest. The benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the book club. Now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program, as you can see on your screen, is titled Al Martinez in the Korean War, a future columnist hones his craft. And our presenter is Sarah S. Hodson. Now, Sarah S. Hodson, also known as Sue Hodson, is the retired curator of literary collections for the Huntington Library, where she oversaw all British and American literary manuscripts from the Renaissance to the present, and all modern literary rare books. Now, Sue earned her BA with honors and her MA degrees in English from Whittier College and her MLS from UCLA. She has spoken and published widely on literary and archival topics, especially privacy and confidentiality in modern manuscript collections. Her articles have appeared in The American Archivist, California History, the Encyclopedia of Library and Information Science, and numerous other publications. Her essay, Freeing the Dead Sea Scrolls, A Question of Access, recounted and analyzed the Huntington Library's historic opening of the scrolls for universal unfettered access. Her honors include the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of California Archivists, and in 2004, she was elected a Fellow of the Society of American Archivists, the highest honor in the archival profession. She was named Woman of the Year in 2012 by the Jack London Foundation, and she received the 2017 Avery Clayton Spirit Award from LA as subject. I Promise You I'll Be Home, Korean War Letters of a U.S. Marine, which is a collection of letters by Al Martinez, was edited by Sue. It was published by McFarland and Company earlier this year. Now, the subject of our presentation this evening is Al Martinez. And her talk, again, is titled Al Martinez in the Korean War, a future columnist hones his craft. Now, for more than 20 years, the Los Angeles Times columnist Al Martinez delighted and enriched the lives of thousands of readers across Southern California. An Oakland native, he attended San Francisco State College. Later, he was a reporter for the Richmond Independent and the Oakland Tribune, before being lured to Los Angeles to write for the Times. Now, by the time he retired in 2009, he had earned an extensive array of awards and honors, including 3 shared Pulitzers and the National Headliner Award for the best column in the US. Before becoming a professional journalist, though, Martinez served in the Korean War at the age of 21 with the US Marines, first on the battlefront, and then as a war correspondent. He dispatched letters almost daily to his young bride, Joanne. Now, tonight, Sue Hodson, the editor of that volume of Al Martinez's Korean War Letters, will share with us the important role Al Martinez played as a combat correspondent and as a storyteller. In terms of logistics for this evening, we will have a presentation and then we'll follow that with a Q&A session. Now, if you have questions or comments for our presenter or about the presentation, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. We should have time at the end of the hour to take questions, and we'll curate those from the chat and the Q&A. Okay, now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sue Hodson. Sue, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. And I want to thank all of you for coming this evening to spend part of your evening with Al Martinez and with me. And I want to thank Kevin Kosick and the Book Club of California for hosting this. It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to appear. And Kevin could not be nicer to work with and more helpful. It's been a joy to work on this with him. So without further ado, we'll launch into Al Martinez. Al, I want to start with two epigrams that Al wrote about wartime life. The first epigram is from a column written in 1998, and he wrote, "That's the way war is sometimes, not just shot and shell, but an awful isolation of spirit. It's in that singularity of existence that we learn about ourselves and glance briefly into the souls of others in the raw awareness that reality provides." The second epigram comes from a column of 1967 that appeared in the Oakland Tribune. He wrote, "Lima beans. I ate them for 12 months straight in Korea. You couldn't throw the damn things away because the Chinese would throw them back. No wonder I hate communism, not to mention lima beans." Al Martinez, whose dates are 1929 to 2015, was an award-winning columnist best known for his long career with the Los Angeles Times. A child of Oakland who grew up in hardship, he attended San Francisco State College for 3 years, editing and writing for the school paper, The Golden Gator, and was in the Marine Reserves before being called up in 1950, soon after the outbreak of the conflict in Korea. First as a rifleman on the front lines, and then as a combat correspondent, he experienced the raw fear and brutality of war, forces that did much to shape his views. After he returned to the States in 1952, he enrolled in the University of California, Berkeley, but soon left to begin his career in journalism at the Richmond Independent, moving on in 1955 to the Oakland Tribune, where he worked as a reporter and columnist. In 1971, Otis Chandler of the Los Angeles Times enticed him to come south. He joined the paper as a reporter, and in 1984, he accepted his own featured column, becoming one of the most popular writers at the paper. And you see here, this is his summation of Los Angeles. L.A., L.A., La La Land, the land of fruits and nuts, the city of fallen angels, of palm trees, smog, and kosher burritos. Aldous Huxley described it as a place of dreadful joy. Raymond Chandler said it had the personality of a paper cup. A downtown street corner evangelist named Bobby Bible calls it the mother of all horrors. I call it Mom. Later, Al wrote that sometimes I'm not sure where reality ends and hallucinations begin. That's why they made me a columnist. For the next 23 years, his columns appeared regularly, earning him 3 Pulitzer Prizes, as you've heard. Those were for stories on the growth of the Latino population in Southern California in 1983, on the Rodney King riots in 1992, and on the Northridge earthquake in 1994. And as you've already heard, he earned the National Headliner Award. In 1996, he received an honorary degree from my alma mater, Whittier College. In the 1970s through 1990s, Al wrote extensively for television, turning out scripts for TV and TV series and films. His credits include scripts for Hawaii Five-0 and Bronx, starring Jack Palance. He created the series Jigsaw John, starring Jack Warden, based on an LA detective he had profiled in a column. His screenplay for the television film Out on the Edge, starring Rick Schroeder, earned him an Emmy nomination. When the Los Angeles Times released him in 2007 in a cost-cutting effort, Thousands of his fans stormed the editorial offices with calls, emails, and letters to protest his release. Astounded, the paper's management reinstated him, but ultimately released him again 18 months later, this time permanently. But Al continued to work as a freelance writer for the Los Angeles Daily News and the Topanga Messenger, as well as other publications, and to teach writing seminars until shortly before his death in 2015. In 2006, the Huntington acquired the archive of his papers. In 2012, I curated a major exhibition on Al. I titled it Al Martinez, Bard of LA, because his writing struck me as so graceful and eloquent that it was close to being poetry. He loved the title and even spun out a column, noting that the Huntington had dubbed him the Bard of LA, but lamenting that it got him no consideration at home. His wife, Joanne, the Bardess, still made him take out the trash, and the Bard dog still menaced him at times. About the exhibition, Al wrote me in an email in March of 2012, quote, "I can hardly contain my excitement. I'd be dancing naked in the streets, except I have no sense of rhythm, and Joanne makes me wear clothes," unquote. But prior to his distinguished career in journalism, as we've noted, Al served on the battlefront in Korea during the mid-century war. The police action, as it was called, in Korea began on June 25th, 1950, when North Korean forces attacked South Korean positions south of the 38th parallel. And on this map, you can see that Incheon, I don't know if you can see my little cursor, there's Incheon, just a little ways below the 38th parallel, and very close to that is the city of Seoul. Way down at the southeast corner is Busan, where all the troops and supplies were offloaded, having been shipped from the States, either directly or indirectly by way of Japan. And let's see, the Chosin Reservoir is up here. That was a famous battle that I'll be mentioning, oops, sorry, just a little bit from now. Okay. The police action in Korea began on June 25th, 1950, when North Korean forces attacked South Korean positions south of the 38th parallel. By September 15th, the 1st Marine Division made an amphibious assault on Incheon, a legendary battle that succeeded against all odds. General MacArthur had insisted on making this landing because then they could advance quickly to the nearby city of Seoul and retake it after the North Koreans had just taken it themselves. All of his generals, all of the admirals, everyone said, "General MacArthur, don't do it. It won't work. There's a 32 feet difference in the tide levels at the Incheon harbor, and there are lots of little islands and little outcroppings that are dangerous. Just don't do it. It can't succeed at all." But it did. And MacArthur made his legendary fame even more legendary at that point. Now, just a few days after the Incheon landing, on September 22nd, Al Martinez, who had been in the Marine Reserves at San Francisco State, departed from the Navy intake area at Treasure Island, San Francisco, and headed to his induction in San Diego. In his first letter written home to Joanne on board the train south, Al writes in a mood of anticipation, trepidation, introspection, and a fair amount of bravado about going off to war in a distant land. Quote, "My darling, the Marine Corps doesn't have me yet, but they're only about 8 hours away from it. We're just outside of San Luis Obispo now. The sun is warm on the windows. Don and I just finished lunch of club sandwiches and milk. There were so many things I wanted to say to you at the depot, but the words died in my throat, and instead I just wanted to cry. You remember when I was talking about the scared little kids in Levi's, bright sport shirts, long hair, etc., and how old I felt beside them? I thought of them on the fields of Korea and in the mountains of China, in the ice of Russia and the heat of the South Pacific. I tried hard to visualize them killing, and I couldn't." He winds up by saying, "Martinez is in the Marine Corps, and heaven help the Russians. Hold back the tears, baby. I'll be back," unquote. 2 months later, just as Al was beginning his basic training, on November 27th, 1950, Chinese troops surprised the U.S. 10th Corps in the area of the Chosin Reservoir, and a brutal, now famous 17-day battle ensued in sub-zero weather. And during that battle, they had to make a strategic retreat through the snow, the sub-zero weather, and the company that Al would join later, Fox Company, played a pivotal role in doing as organized an evacuation or retreat as they could do, saving countless lives of military personnel who were threatened by the violence and the fighting. For more than a year and a half, Al Martinez dispatched letters, 370 of them, nearly every day to his wife Joanne, from September 1950 to April 1952. The letters document 3 phases of Al's military life. They are written from Marine boot camp, from the battlefront in Korea, and from the vantage point of a regimental writer and combat correspondent in the war zone. At age 21, having been married just over a year when he departed, Al and Joanne were barely launched on their life together when they had to endure the loneliness of living apart, as well as the deep anxiety for Al's safety in the heat of battle. The letters Al writes home from basic training tell, in some ways, a familiar tale of discipline being pounded into raw recruits, but he probes more deeply into the situations around him, as well as the lives of his buddies, to tell important, moving stories of the men's experiences and states of mind. The Korean War straddled the midpoint between the black and white loyalties of the Second World War, with its clearly defined sense of right and wrong, and when the patriotic war effort in the US was largely unquestioned, and on the other hand, Vietnam, with its more ambiguous issues that colored the view of both the military and the public. In this excerpt from a letter dated January 3rd, 1951, Al describes the bitterness and cynicism of his fellow Boots, an attitude that foreshadows both the civil protest and the unrest within the military that would emerge full-blown during the war in Vietnam. Quote, "You'd be surprised, Joanne, if you could see the tremendous amount of apathy and disgust here at Pendleton, of all places. Men talk openly of going AWOL and mean it. They plan it all out in the open. 2 or 3 are always missing at roll call in the morning. The average has raised to 15 men a night going over the hill. One of my good buddies has never come back from his 10-day leave. Officers practically beg their men to stay and advise them to come and talk to the COs if they feel like going AWOL. The situation is desperate," unquote. On another occasion in basic training, Al writes on January 15th, 1951, about a chilling incident when a recruit utterly loses his senses. Quote, "The hills were steep. We were on our way back when some kid dropped his gear and went screaming down the side of the hill, completely and hopelessly snapped. The gunner caught him, then started spouting off. 'What the hell is Uncle Sam supposed to do? Apologize to you mothers for bearing idiots?' The kid was laying conscious in the back of a pickup truck, and the gunner approached him with, 'Why don't you scream now?' He continually rode the subject, ridiculed the kid. I didn't know the kid personally, but I do know that he wasn't kidding. The stretch was just too much for him, and it seemed that he had to crack sooner or later. He was sensitive, homesick, and maybe a little too young to think in terms of guns and war. I wish I knew. The closer I come to a military machine, the further away from it I grow. I suppose in time they'll make a Marine out of me, hard, without scruples, but never without a mind. It seems such a shame to waste a generation that might have done something. This day has been rather miserable. It wasn't the gunner's fault. He had to handle it that way to keep the company from mutiny," unquote. Once in Korea, Al is assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment, or the 2-7, in the 1st Marine Division. Their insignia shows the motto, "Ready for all, yielding to none." As a replacement, he is sent to Fox Company, which had earned great distinction, as I mentioned, at the Chosin Reservoir. After Al joins the unit, he helps his buddies create an image and motto, and here he poses with the resulting sign, Fox Company, hot to trot. Once he reaches the front line of Korea, Al writes home about the action and hardships he faces. Even though he softens his letters for Joanne so she won't read of the very worst horrors of combat, nonetheless, his stories evoke the fighting with its danger and terror. On April 15th, he writes, quote, "Expecting the Chinese to attack tonight. All is in readiness for them. If something should happen, I love you very, very much, Joanne. And it gives me an odd feeling of power, which I know you'd be proud of, to realize that I'm not afraid. No, darling, I'm not afraid. Referring to his diary, he goes on, I'm writing of all of these, of a Marine fresh out of the diaper brigade in Japan, 17-year-olds, wondering if he should shave because it's Sunday when he has nothing to shave anyhow, of another picking leaves out of his yellowed coffee, of yet another looking about 16 years old and loading a rifle like he's been doing it 100 years. I'm writing of a chipmunk scurrying suddenly through the leaves and bringing 40 men to a firing position, silent and listening, of a flare lighting up the sky and of eyes staring into the blackness it leaves when it fades. I'm writing of night and day, of life and of just existence, and of death, which is the inevitable for some who must fight a war. And I'm writing of men like myself, who love and watch and think, and who laugh at their misery because it holds a plot that no other writer has been able to top, unquote. Many of the letters from the front provide accounts of battle action. Although they are straightforward, Al relates the stories with a literary flair for exciting narrative, as in this letter written on May 18th, 1951. In this letter, he also goes on to refer to a certain significant occurrence that's expected in the family. Dear Joanne, and you notice here in his self-caricature, he says, look, darling, I'm smiling too. That's because she had encouraged him to smile when things looked the worst, that it would only make him feel better. So he's assuring her that he's following her advice. He starts the letter, I'm writing this letter down deep in my foxhole, comfortably ensconced on my sleeping bag, peaceful and at peace with the world. For the past 2 days, we've been on the move at the usual breakneck Marine pace over hill and over dale. Where are we going? I asked idly yesterday. Back to the front lines, was the reply from the gunny. Back to the lines where we've been? Oh, he pondered, about 6 miles into no man's land. Had I known that, I wouldn't have slept nights, believe me. I thought we were on the lines with troops all around. There were troops all around, Chinese troops. In front of us is a valley covered with mines. To our rear are tanks and artillery. In my foxhole are 10 hand grenades, 5 rifle grenades. I'm the only rifle grenadier in the squad. 1 white phosphorus, 2 flares, about 500 rounds of ammo, and me. Why, hell, I could hold them off by myself. This is the most protection we've ever had. Usually they throw us out in front of God and the Chinese with an M1 and say, kick hell out of them, unquote. He goes on, since I haven't gotten any mail lately, I don't know how things are going in San Francisco, but I know you're doing okay. I can hardly wait to have the Red Cross notify me that I'm a daddy. Doggone, me, a father. It's so wonderful, I can hardly believe it. I lie awake nights planning how we're going to raise our child into a fine person. We being so young ourselves, we can all have a lot of fun together. You know, hon, once I get a job and get going, I would like a dozen kids. Hell, maybe even 2 dozen. We're Martinez's. How does that sound, Ma? Charming? Delightful. Feel energetic? I do. Uh-huh. Unquote. Al received a telegram later announcing that he was a father, but it took 2 more weeks before Joanne's letter arrived telling him the baby was a daughter, Cynthia. During those 2 weeks of waiting, Al had plaintively asked anyone nearby whether he was a mother or a father. Here's another excerpt from a letter, this time dated June 3rd, 1951. Quote, it all began when we were moving through the valley. The Chinese hit from both sides. We had casualties, not many. We went up the ridge and Fox secured 1. As we started up, mortars hit in the valley and put out 175 millimeter. I heard screams. We moved up on the ridge and dug in. The Koreans were dug in on the opposite ridge. That night, a white phosphorus shell landed on our hill. 3 men screamed in the night, and it was all over for them. The next morning, we prepared to assault the ridge. The 3rd platoon moved into position. Mr. Buckman, platoon leader of the 3rd platoon, led the attack. A grenade hit him and knocked his helmet off. He got back on his feet and kept running. Another grenade stopped his courageous advance forever. The ridge was secured. About 154 prisoners were taken. 4 Marines paid for it, unquote. Whenever Marines were lost in battle, like the four just mentioned in Al's letter, replacements would arrive to fill out the ranks and complete the complement. Even though the need for replacements held a high degree of sorrow for all of them, Al still managed to find humor, as in this drawing of Ronnie Replacement. You can see the bullet whizzing through his helmet. His rifle is smoking, like he's not quite sure what just happened. And the caption is, "When somebody shoots back." Al also derived humor from some of the discomforts of life on the front, as in this letter, dated in his wording, June 18th, I think. He offers his take on the annoyances of insect life for a Marine in the field. And you see here on a page of drawings that he included, up in the upper left-hand on the left, the upper left-hand part of this page is his drawing of a fly. And they must have seemed that every bit that big. He writes to Joanne, quote, "Something has to be done about the flies. I've killed them, cursed them, threatened them, and unleashed my artistic wrath on them. I've talked to them, warning them that I'm a Marine and not to be messed with, but with utter disregard for rank or outfit, they still come. I've begged them, reasoned with them, and appeased them by setting out parts of my rations to no avail. They come literally by the dozens per person, Joanne, and there is no way to stop them. When you try to shake them off, they cling. And when you throw a fit and finally do make them fly, they buzz you once and return. I've seen a man walking with 20 flies on his back. They eat on me, reperpetuate their breed, use me as a toilet, rub their legs, and generally use me as the local meeting place. I'll go bats if I can't do something. They drive me to distraction. Honey, what'll I do?" Unquote. The sense of humor that Al and Joanne shared afforded them considerable relief and solace from the dangers of battle that Al experienced. Their love held an undergirding of fun and joking that sustained them, no matter how dire Al's circumstances were. At one point, Joanne sent Al a little cardboard airplane, a prize from a cereal box, on which she had planted a kiss. Al kissed it and returned it to her, writing, "I love you with all my heart and soul. On this little plane I return to my home is my love, my heart, and my very life. Take it, it's yours." Al's sense of the tragedy of lives lost in combat is apparent throughout the letters, but especially in a letter written on about August 12th, 1951. This letter is penned on the back of a booklet titled "In Memoriam, 7th Marines, Colonel Herman Nickerson, Jr., USMC Commanding." Inside the booklet, Al has marked the names of the comrades he knew who have been killed. You see that on the left. On the right, his letter reads, "Dearest Joanne, a lot of these men are ones you knew, friends of mine, whom you met at the dog company party in San Clemente. You may not remember them, but that makes little difference to everyone concerned. In a few years, it won't make any difference to the world that they died on a napalm-charred, ugly hill in Korea. To me, it makes a great deal of difference. I want a lesson in life to be burned white hot on my brain. I want to remember them when they laughed, the way they laughed. I want to torture my memory until I can see them clearly. Then I want to cut them off, let them die, as they did in Korea. Then I want to write about it and tell America, here are your sons, torn apart, mutilated, dead perhaps for a noble cause, dead nonetheless. Wave a flag and try to revive them. Here then is the consequence of a righteous war." The Battle of the Punch Bowl, which took place from August to October 1951, was one of the last battles of the so-called movement phase of the war, before the conflict became nothing more than a standoff along the front line, where the troops would dig in, watch the enemy also digging in, send out patrols to see if anything had changed, and come back, and then move someplace else to dig in again. For this Battle of the Punch Bowl, the UN troops launched an offensive to straighten sections of their lines, gain better defensive terrain, and deny the enemy crucial vantage points from which they could observe and target key UN positions. The Battle of Bloody Ridge took place first, and then the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. Al was involved in this battle, as he learned later. On October 15th, 1951, Al is transferred to the regiment's public information office. The next day, he writes to Joanne, quote, "At 6:35 p.m., I have completed my first day with regimental PIO, or Public Information Office. It's been an unusual day, quite different from the ones I knew only a short while ago. I met the major in charge of PIO and several others. I worked on my first publication of the Ridge Runner, the regimental mimeograph paper. I took news off the dictate radio and I wrote it, traced cartoons on stencil paper, wrote heads, and pounded out 4 feature stories. The colonel and sergeant major go for the idea of feature stories on the men in the companies, and they like the fact that I'm fresh from the lines. So far, so good, unquote. A few days later, Al is also appointed to be a combat correspondent, writing to Joanne, quote, I'm still in a fog. Corporal Al Martinez, combat correspondent, 7th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division. How about that? As I look back over this letter, I can see it's, as usual, all Martinez and all about writing. But at least you can see I'm happy for the first time in 7 months. Honestly, darling, if you could only feel the surge of being useful again after 7 months of murdering inactivity. For me, nothing is worse than feeling useless. The hum and speed of journalism has caught me again, and I love the jumping tap of the writer, as I always have. I love that last story being typed out at night. I love to watch the type and paper form into a living message. I love the feeling of accomplishment that comes with another story, another issue. It's me again, learning, experimenting, profiting by slow degrees. It's me again, Joanne, and after months of nonentity, I can believe it again, unquote. And here you see Al seated at his typewriter. This was a cartoon drawn by a man named Bob Richardson, who was the cartoonist for the Ridge Runner newsletter that Al would edit. And I like to think that this is a photograph of Al as the contemplative author working on his next byline, his next article, or perhaps suggesting the next cartoon to Richardson. Joanne had sent Al a toy turtle that he carried in his jacket through all the days and nights of 7 months in combat. He named the turtle Boondocker after the boots that Marines wore in combat. Beginning with the turtle's arrival in Korea, Al always signed his letters from Al and Boondocker. And here you see Boondocker. He's part of a large page of letter and cartoons from Al. And then over on the left, you can see the enlarged picture of Boondocker, the combat turtle. On November 20th, 1951, Al writes in memory of a fallen Marine, quote, across the burning, thundering hills of Korea he went, a combat Marine, an inimitable individual, suffering out the dark and dreadful days of the attack when all around him fell but one he depended on. His buddy, the one he watched with the vigilance of devotion, carried this combat machine into the fight, and where he went, they went, one and inseparable, bearing out the fine tradition of combat comradeship. When the night settled over the land, dangerous and deceitful, this little Marine stayed awake, staring out into the shifting ebonies of shadows, keeping watch over his Marine for a girl that loved him. And now his buddy, Al Martinez, is safe, so this little Marine can rest. But something is discovered. He's wounded, a casualty. A leg is gone. The sturdy little man trudged silently in all that is horrible, with a pain of which he bore no mention. We can only now decorate him. To Boondocker Martinez, my buddy, my luck, I proudly present the Purple Heart Medal for wounds received. And there is Boondocker wearing his Purple Heart ribbon. And here is Boondocker in context as part of that entire letter with other drawings by Al Martinez. Even though Al could find humor in his everyday life at the front, he could joke about his toy turtle receiving a Purple Heart. He never lost sight of the realities of warfare. After his transfer to the Public Information Office, he still visited his old comrades at the front. This letter was written on December 1st, 1951. Quote, dearest Joanne, I felt pretty good all day today. I felt like writing you a real long letter. That was up until about 5 o'clock. Then I found out something from the S1 office. One artillery shell had rocketed into Fox Company's position today. 2 men were killed. One was a fellow by the name of Seabloom. I didn't even know his first name. He was a nice kid, about 18, blonde, young looking. He was the baby of the machine gun section attached to the 2nd platoon. I came to like him a lot. A hell of a nice kid. He used to kid me about my wife and daughter. Used to say he would go home before me and look up my pretty blonde wife. When I got transferred to PIO, I almost forgot to shake hands with him and wish him good luck. He was hurt, but I remembered, then everything was okay. Seablum and I never hung around each other too much, but when we were together or when we stopped to talk on the road, we were the best of buddies. Picture this, Joanne, a young kid with a baby face, from Cincinnati, I think. I don't really remember. Laughing, always kidding, a kid that's never really been in love and hasn't experienced life. One minute he was writing to his mother. Now he's dead, horribly dead. In 3 days, we go into reserve for Christmas. A nice little guy by the name of Seablum won't be around, and I'll miss him. Casualties were light today. 2 killed in action, just 2. One of them I happen to know. All my love, Al. In 1993, after he's long been back from the war, of course, Al and Joanne, together with other Korean War veterans, traveled to South Korea on a trip sponsored by the U.S. Navy League, Korean Airlines, and other organizations. Al wrote a column about his journey called The Boys of Autumn. It was published on November 13th, 1993 in the Los Angeles Times. Part of it reads, quote, I saw a man cry who had never cried before. I saw a widow search for the exact place where her husband had died. I saw a son trying to reconstruct the last days of a father he had never seen. I stood on a mountaintop, 3,000 feet high, and looked over a vista of almost surreal beauty, of ridgelines cascading back into the distance in muted tones of blue and gray, of autumn colors so bright they were blinding. I tried to remember how it had been back then, trudging past the stepped rice paddies to reach the foot of the mountains, and then charging up their steep slopes in the face of gunfire. They were the days of drums and bugles, of victories so sweet they can never be achieved again, of fear so deep and elemental it can never be repeated. But I couldn't recreate them that day on the mountaintop, and it's just as well. The war is over and the dead long buried. I sensed an acceptance of that among those who made the trip back in time. Perhaps now they will rest easier in their dreams. The drums are silent, the buglers gone. The Korean War Memorial, which you see here, was dedicated in 1995 in Washington, D.C. Al was asked to attend and write about it. His essay is entitled When Night Falls, published in Reflections, one of his book collections, and it appeared in 1995. Quote, nightmare was the worst of all times in Korea. Its absolute darkness, embracing the potential of a dozen ways to die. I knew with certainty that the snap of a twig could be the last sound I would ever hear, the final single tap of a drumbeat before a bullet. The memory of night's menace has lasted 45 years, emerging at unexpected moments like a bird startled into flight, causing an almost physical reaction to keep low and seek cover. And so it was proper that I should visit the newly dedicated Korean War Memorial as dusk fell over the Washington Mall. The 19 soldiers that compose the memorial seemed to move with the shadows that shifted with the transition from day to evening. Pale green spotlights cast their faces into ever-deepening expressions of tension and anxiety. The images were haunting. I saw myself there and heard a twig snapping. There were no parades and bugles when we came home. No crowds cheered. No storms of confetti and streamers fell from buildings. Now, if nothing else, the monument tells us our pain is acknowledged and the brutality of our war is recognized. To that extent, we can slip out of the uniforms of our memories and rest easily with our terrible encounter. Finally, there has been a tribute. Finally, a parade. Finally, a band. I can say with a satisfaction I never anticipated that after decades adrift in nights I can never forget, I'm home at last. Unquote. One of Al's last pieces on the war, called Korea, Memories of a Distant Thunder, appeared in LA Observed in September of 2013. He wrote, quote, I have processed all of that over the years. It's only a distant thunder now. But something happened the other night. Part of a miniseries on the war called Fire and Ice was playing on television. When I realized what the show was, I called for the others to come and see the war I had fought a long time ago. Come and see your husband charging up a hill. Come and see your father loaded down with weapons. Come and see your grandpa, thin and hard and angry. See napalm blossoming like fiery red roses on an icy hillside. See tanks roaring and clattering by, and corsairs flying low. See me transfixed by the violent calligraphy, a witness to the end of the world. But no one responded. So I sat alone before the television set and was pulled deeper into my isolation, to the Washan Reservoir, where half of a Marine battalion was lost, to Hill 749, the most terrifying night of my life, where my best friend died in my arms, to gruesome images of napalm-blackened enemy corpses, fathers and brothers and sons who had died in the posture of their fight. I turned off the TV and sat staring at the set until Joanne called me for me to join them. My face, tired and old, reflected off the darkened screen. Come on, she coaxed. The war is over. The face left the screen as I rose from my chair, willing to walk away, but knowing that the horror still festers in a corner of my soul and that the war will never be over, unquote. Throughout his letters, Al adopts a number of different tones depending on his mood. He can be elegiac in describing the beauty of a starry night in Korea. He can be hard-bitten when writing about the enemy, but also gentle in portraying Korean children or civilian adults whose lives are ruined by war. He can be contemplative in writing about the heroism of comrades in arms and about the meaning of war. He can be funny in presenting character studies of other Marines, and he is at times whimsical about the humorous or ridiculous aspects of military life. He is tender and loving and occasionally lusty and earthy with his wife, and he teases her, revisiting shared jokes. For example, from an apparent past misstatement when he referred to her as having ruby teeth and pearly white lips. Oops. And he is filled with love and awe for his infant daughter, signing off each letter with kisses, capital X's for Joanne and lowercase x's for baby Cynthia. Throughout, Al is never less than eloquent and insightful about his situation and about others around him. He brings to the letters a keen intellect, a deep understanding of humankind, a sense of humor about life and its vagaries, and a writer's ability to enliven and enrich the stories of his experiences. The letters form a complete narrative arc, telling the full story of the 3 phases of Al's service in the Marines. In them, he tells the story of every man on the battlefront, but he also tells the unique tale of his own specific life, the lived experience that is so crucial for documenting and enriching about the people who lived through major events in history. Thank you very much.
I'm back. You're waiting for me to come back. That was terrific. I have so many notes and so many questions for you that we probably won't get to all of my questions, because we want attendees out there to take time right now to put some questions or your comments in the chat or in the Q&A. They're both available for you if you have anything you want to say or ask about. Now is the time to go put something there. I did also put in the chat information about how to buy the book that's on your screen right now. We're going to leave that up there for a moment so you can, of course, ponder this amazing photo of Al. She knows how much I love this photo.
Me too.
And
Me too.
that is the title of the book. I Promise You I'll Be Home, Korean War Letters of a U.S. Marine. And that, again, the information about that is in the chat if you're interested in getting a copy of that from the publisher or from your local bookstore or on Amazon. I will say that this was pretty amazing. I didn't know really anything about Al Martinez before we connected and we started talking about having you do a talk for the book club. And I think, just thank you for introducing me and probably many maybe Northern California or Southern California book club members to this incredible man, amazing, interesting figure, with such a great sense of humor, especially at a very dire and trying time of, I mean, during his life experience, for him to still have such a great sense of humor and being insightful and thoughtful about people and places and the world in general is, it's kind of amazing. I mean, he was a columnist, TV writer. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
With an Emmy nomination, that's pretty cool.
And still able to dress himself.
In The Soldier, I love the Bard of LA. And somebody who hates lima beans. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
He's just the everyman. I loved it. It was great. I will start, I think, with one of the questions that Gloria kind of has put up in the Q&A, about his, how his experiences in Korea, shaped his experience or his thoughts or maybe his writing on the Vietnam War or his other writing in general post his Korean wartime.
Right. That's a great question. Al was a man of a soft heart. He could wear his heart on his sleeve, and he was never ashamed of that, never embarrassed by that. He had a real soft heart. He was a humanitarian. He was humane. He loved people. He empathized with people. And I knew him as an older man. I didn't know him obviously when he was younger. And so one thing that impressed me was that he already possessed those qualities, but they were deepened considerably by his experience in the war. He would often say to Joanne in his letters that, heck, I'm not a fighter. I don't go to war. I'm a pacifist. I'm a lover, not a fighter. And he really was. And so I just throughout this, I could see his experience deepening and enriching his humanitarian views and ways. One thing that struck me from this, in his boot camp, he was able to understand why the gunnery sergeant behaved the way he did, was cruel and mean and demanding. And Al understood that he had to be that way and empathized with that. He was able to empathize with both sides. He was as upset at the treatment he received as any other Marine in boot camp, but he understood what the purpose was and where they were headed and what they needed to achieve. So I think his experience in the war simply deepened and enriched things he was already feeling and experiencing. And one thing I always noticed in his columns was he was always taking the side of the down and out. He wrote one column about coming across a homeless encampment underneath a freeway, and they'd been driven out to someplace else. They'd left things there, and he looked through what they'd left. He found a drawing by a child that showed a home and a family, stick figures, the family standing in front of that home. And he wrote about this. It broke his heart to think that a child living homeless can imagine and envision and wish for a home for herself and her family. And, that touched him very deeply. And I think that he already had it, but it also came out of the war. That intensified it.
Let's stop the share now so people can see you close up.
Okay.
Enjoy our conversation a little better here.
You're probably going to scream, put the share back on, put the share back on.
Yeah, they can minimize your face if they want to.
Good. Okay.
I think folks are curious to hear about Joanne's letters to Al.
Yeah.
And that you showed us that great airplane with the lipstick on it, but tell us more about like her side of the conversation, because they were having this really deep conversation.
They were. Here's the great tragedy. Her letters to him did not survive. There are only 9 letters from her, and they were all written while he was in boot camp down in San Diego. And they're all logistics. Where shall I meet you at the hotel? What train should I take? How long leave do you have? So we've lost all of her letters. And the reason for that is that especially when he was in foxholes in the front lines, he had no way to keep them. You know, he and his buddies would be in their foxholes. The gunny would come by and go, all right, 20 minutes, everybody out. And then in 20 minutes, they'd have to pack up all their stuff and they'd be out. And they didn't know where they were going. They never knew where they'd been or where they were going. They were told, march 6 miles that way and we'll dig in again. That's all they knew. And so he couldn't take the letters with them. When he wrote his letters home, he a couple of times asked Joanne, are you saving my letters? Please be sure to save them all because I want to do something with them someday.
Nice.
But her letters didn't survive. So
Yeah.
that's such a loss. We don't have her voice at all. And I wish we did. And we don't have any photographs of her from that time either.
Oh, interesting.
No, and
Yeah.
I would have included something like that in.
Yeah,
So she very much is a sort of a spectral figure. She's there but not there in this. And I try to bring her into it as much as possible.
I mean, so central to the whole idea of letter writing and the recipient and how it's, you know, taken absorbed, right? How people reacted to. What was your process for choosing which letters? I mean, there's probably so many letters.
Yeah.
Did you have what was your approach for that?
What I did is, well, the whole experience of deleting letters was, I called it exquisite agony because the letters are so wonderful. There were 370 total, and we couldn't publish all of them. There are 107 in the book, so that's fewer than a third. What I did first of all was delete the easy ones. There were some where he repeated the same information and perhaps not as eloquently, and so I would delete those. And then that took me a certain way along in the process. And then I deleted some that I thought didn't really tell something that would benefit anyone to know, like something that he was, you know, like a poker game or something. And it just didn't seem to advance anything. But what I tried to keep was the main story arcs through all of the letters, and keep the best examples and that told the best stories in the best way. And that told the full array of the kinds of letters he wrote. And it became just sheer torture at the end as it got down to, well, I've got to get rid of 2 more. Which ones am I going to get rid of? And that was really difficult, very difficult.
I'm glad you didn't get rid of the ones with the little drawings in it and his illustrations.
No,
those are so amazing.
Aren't they great? Yeah. You know, one of the ironies is that a lot of times his best drawings were in letters that had not very much content, because if he didn't have very much to write about, he would send drawings. And so, you know, that was kind of, oh dear, oh dear. So I ended up including in the book several of the drawings that just simply had to be there, even though the letters didn't make it in.
Yeah. I love at the bottom of one of them, he writes, I guess I'd better stick to writing, huh?
Yeah.
And you showed us,
exactly.
Like, no, you should do more illustrations.
I know.
Did he do
wasn't
anything?
bad.
They were great. They were charming and delightful. Yeah. Did he do anything more with that side of his artistic outlet after? I mean, he clearly wrote as a columnist.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I never, and you know, the archive of his papers is at the Huntington. I didn't see any drawings in there. If there was anything, they would be no more than doodles like any of us would do. But what I think is interesting is that his granddaughter, Nicole, who did a portrait of him, which is beautiful. I borrowed that portrait for the exhibit I did, because I just thought it was spectacular. And so clearly there's artistic ability, you know. And Joanne was a very good writer. And she was not a bad artist. So I think there was a lot of artistic and writing ability that came from both Joanne and Al and went down into the family.
So I don't know which question to ask first. So you did the exhibition, and did he know you were doing the exhibition? Like, did you work together on the exhibition? And then did he know you were going to edit his letters?
No, he didn't know that. He knew I was doing an exhibition, and he didn't work with me on it except I would ask him questions, but he didn't decide on what items I would use, because I had to decide what stories needed to be told. But I would ask him questions for clarification. And he loved the fact that we were doing an exhibition. He just loved it. I mean, he wrote that column about being the Bard of LA. He
Yeah.
loved it. And he and I emailed constantly. And, usually when you do an exhibit, it's it's a lot of agony. You do it on top of work that's already too much, and you do it anyway. So it just makes you crazy. But Al was emailing me every day, and he had me laughing. People would walk by my office and they would say, "Sue, you're having too much fun in there," because I'd be laughing at his emails. But he didn't know that I was wanting to do an edition of the letters. Um, I had decided that I wanted to do one, and I probably would. And I didn't get to tell him before he passed away. And I was a little concerned anyway that if I told him I was going to do it, he might want it to be done faster than I'd be able to do it, because I knew it would take a long time. It took me 8 or 9 months to transcribe all 370 letters. It took a long, long time. And then there was all the rest of the work, the editorial work and the writing introductions and the citations and the footnotes and all of that stuff. So, but he didn't know I was. Joanne did, and she was an enormous help. I asked her a lot of questions, and she remembered a lot, but there was a lot she couldn't, because it had been 70 years before that. So there was stuff she couldn't remember. And then more recently, I've been working with their two grown children, Alan or Marty Martinez and Linda Bach, and they've just both been fantastic, very, very helpful. So it's been really the job of a lifetime, I think. I've loved every minute of working on this book.
If people are interested in reading some of his columns, is there a place they can do that? Is there an online archive?
Well, it's not easy. His favorite ones, he had collected into bound volumes and put up for sale, and they're out of print, all of them. If you were to go on ABE or to any used book online source and search Al Martinez, you might be able to find used copies. That's what I did when I was working on the exhibition, so I could read every column possible, even though I'd read his columns when they appeared in the paper.
Right.
So his books again are out of print, but if you do some searching, you can find them. And in the back of this book, there's a bibliography of his book titles, and you can use that to search. But it's not easy to find them. If you go on the LA Times website and search through their archives, you can probably find a lot of them. And I'm not sure how hard that would be. Some of his columns were not findable, and I had some help by insiders at the Times put me onto a couple of his Korean War columns.
Okay. Let's see. We're just past the top of the hour, but I had a question, and we'll use this as the final question, since I don't see any other questions that we haven't already talked about. I don't know if you told us how you originally came to discover Al Martinez and want to do an exhibition and then do these letters. Like, what was your introduction to him, and then what became your obsession with him?
Okay, I read the LA Times, from my teen years on up, and I read Al's column every time it appeared, and I loved his writing. So I knew of him for a long time. Once I was at the Huntington Library has the LA Times archive, the History Center records. So it's got a huge collection of LA Times history. We also collected Paul Conrad's papers, the editorial cartoonist, and Jack Smith, another featured columnist. And I had my eye on Al, and he actually spoke at an event celebrating Jack Smith's archive at the Huntington. And Al turned to me in front of an audience of 400 people and said, "So, Sue, when are you going to ask for my papers?" And I said, "Right now, Al, do you have it ready for me?" I knew he was going to ask, and it was great. I was glad he did. And so I wanted his papers. They fit in perfectly. And I went out and worked with him. We went to his public storage unit and cleaned it out, loaded it in a truck. It came back to the Huntington. And then Al being Al, he said, "So, Sue, do I have to be dead to get an exhibit?" And I said, "No, Al, how do you like 2012? I was ready for him. And he said, "Great." So we did the exhibit. And during that, I hadn't known before then that he'd been in the Marines in the Korean War. I found those letters in the archive, and I had to read through. I couldn't read through all of them. I read through selections and scanned a lot of them. I knew I needed to do at least one case in the exhibit, one section devoted to his time in the Marine Corps. And so I put several letters in there. I think the airplane with the kiss on it made it into the case. I wanted to use the turtle Boondocker, but Joanne and Al both said that Boondocker had disappeared, sadly. Boondocker gave his all for Al and then disappeared. But and Al loved the exhibit, and he came and gave talks and he gave tours through the exhibition. He just was in his element.
Combat turtle would have been great.
Absolutely. That's right.
This was terrific, Sue. Thank you so much for sharing your research, your book, and Al Martinez with us. This was just been so delightful. I am now in love with the Al Martinez story. And you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. It's been an honor. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you everyone for coming.
And yes, thanks everyone for attending this Book Club of California program. Please join us for our next virtual program on Monday, July 15th, a week from tonight at 5 o'clock. It's titled California, a Slave State. And our speaker is Jean Felser, author and professor emerita of English and American Studies at the University of Delaware. You can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs or using any of the links in the emails that you're probably getting from the book club about our upcoming calendar of events. So I hope you will join us a week from tonight. Thanks again for joining us tonight. I hope you have a wonderful evening and be well, take care of yourself, and stay cool out there if you're weathering the California heat wave. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.